Hello and welcome to round 4 of PTQ Dragon's Maze from Liverpool. We're following a couple of guys here who are 3-0. Ian O'Brien's playing Scape Shift, the Rook version, and he'll be against Joe Fletcher playing Blue-White Angels. There certainly seems to be a lot of the old Blue-White Angels crops up from time to time in the UK.
Yeah, it's a really big deck in the UK. It's a lot bigger than it is anywhere else in the world, I feel. Pretty much any time it's even viable in the environment, you'll see people playing blue-white in the UK. So if you're going to a modern PTQ, you better be ready for it.
Now, I imagine this kind of matchup is the one that is either going to be a blowout, in other words, when someone gets screwed, or the games can end up going quite long.
Yeah, I think that for the most part these games are going to go quite long, unless Joe gets a really aggressive start with something like Geist of St. Traft and Restoration Angel. I can imagine this game's going to go pretty long.
So what's the plan of attack here for the Scape Shift player?
The Scape Shift player pretty much just wants to sit there laying land for pretty much the entirety of the game. Scape Shift is one of the very rare decks in the environment that can actually out-counter the blue-white control deck. So, if in that case, what Ian wants to do is basically just sit there, making land, and eventually cast Scape Shift when he's got a full grip of 7 cards, and with the majority of them being counter spells.
Yeah, it's important to notice that Scape Shift players do like their cryptic commands.
Yep, Ian's playing 4, I believe, in his Scape Shift deck. And he's also playing Spell Pierce and Remand as well, so he's just putting as many counter spells into his deck as he possibly can.
So we often talk about this. We often say that in a matchup you always have the sort of the control player and the aggro player, and in this case Joe might feel like a little bit like a fish out of water because he's going to have to be the aggro player in this game, because if he continues to sit back, at some point Scape Shift will just do its combo and win, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one thing Ian doesn't want to happen has kind of happened, and he's had to play one of his 2 Valakuts. Because of that, Joe, with his Tectonic Edge, Joe will be able to keep Ian from doing too much damage with Valakut. But as long as Ian doesn't lay his 2nd Valakut, he can still just go off at his leisure when he's up to 8 lands or so. And unlike what most people might think of as a combo deck, Scape Shift isn't really a racing combo deck like many of the combo decks, say in Legacy, where you come up with the Ad Nauseam Tendrils deck, which tries to just kill you as fast as possible. The Scape Shift deck's usually it's quite plodding for a combo deck, and it's very capable of just playing the control role.
Of course, at this point, the game's up so far as Joe's concerned. I mean, he should know what he's up against now.
Yeah, I mean, he's up against a deck with Valakuts and ramp spells, which pretty much signifies just Scape Shift all over the place. So Joe might want to change a little bit of attack here and try and go on the offense a bit. He's got to be wary though, because once Ian gets up to 7 lands, then he can just fire off a Scape Shift and pretty much instantly win. So he can't just sit back forever. This is one of the very good cards against any sort of combo deck, really. Vendilion Click.
We're assuming this is being done during upkeep?
Yeah, I'm assuming it's end of turn, to tell you the truth, this one, because the Search for Tomorrow is already resolved and he's laid a land, so I imagine that's end of turn. And Cryptic Commanding counter draw phase, and you see that Ian's got a couple of Pyroclasms in his hand. They're not really going to assist his cause too much unless Joe starts making Geist of St. Trafts.
I mean, generally, in this modern format, Pyroclasm's sort of one of the better cards with all the Jund decks around.
Yeah, I mean, from a lot of the testing with groups and what people have been saying, the format seems to be pretty weak to either Pyroclasm or Geist of St. Traft. The Haunted Zoo deck that's out is pretty much full of X2s. The Jund deck's full of X2s unless they're called Tarmogoyf. It's really, I mean, even the Blue-White Angel deck, it's like the Geist of St. Traft is 2/2, Vendilion Clicks an X1. It's a pretty devastating card overall. And Ian's doing what we assumed he's going to do. He's just sitting back, laying land, and at some point when Joe gives him a window of opportunity, I'm sure that he will try and take it. But for the moment, he's just going to sit back on his hand.
Of course, in the olden days, the combo players would play a card called Turnabout to tap their opponents out.
Either that or Mana Short. Mana Short was also one of the favourites at the time, mainly because it emptied your opponent's mana pool as well. So it's a pretty serious spell in the control mirror as well, Mana Short. When you were trying to resolve something, if you were going back to Psychotog days, you would often Cunning Wish for a Mana Short to try and tap your opponent out and resolve an upheaval.
But Joe's problem right now is that he's just not playing land out. You know, really what Joe needs to be able to do is make a threat and then still have enough land to be able to win the counter war afterwards. So long as Ian carries on playing the land out and Joe doesn't, it makes it very hard for Joe to win.
Yeah, I mean, what he's hoping happens is that Ian ends up trying to go for the combo when he's not got the resources to do it at that point, where he's literally can maybe fire the Scapeshift off with 1 or 2 counter spells back up, and Joe can just fire off enough counter spells to keep himself in it. But obviously Joe's got to lay land himself in order to do that, so it's going to be a little bit difficult for him. I imagine this is going to play out very much like the blue-white flash deck in Standard, where Joe's not going to be doing a huge amount during his turn, and I think the only time we're going to be seeing Ian doing a lot during his turn is going to be when he's trying to go off, essentially.
And we're definitely going to see some Pyroclasms. There goes one discarded already.
Yeah, both players seem to be playing draw, discard, go at the moment, trying to look for land. That isn't ideal for Scapeshift. I would imagine Scapeshift would be slightly better positioned than blue-white to draw out of this. Ian, I believe, plays 27 land in his Scapeshift deck, and I think blue-white decks can play as much as 25, 26. In Standard, 27 became the norm for a while, just because people were playing 4 Celestial Colonnades.
When you're playing the man lands, it makes it a lot easier to run a few more.
Yeah, they also had to make sure that they were always able to play Jace the Mind Sculptor on turn 4 when that was legal in Standard as well. You missed your 4th land drop, you couldn't drop your Jace. But there's Celestial Colonnade for Joe. And at least that's something that he can potentially present a threat with, but it does require him tapping out, so it's not ideal. Spell Snare on a Peer Through Depths there from Joe.
I don't think we'll get into a counter war over this too much.
Really,
I mean, Ian doesn't mind having a counter war during Joe's turn.
No, he doesn't, so if Ian has something like a Cryptic Command or something like that, he feels like he could potentially burn for an
But
extra
again, you
card
want
at
your
this point.
Cryptic Commands to resolve, ideally, in this format.
Ideally, yeah. And there's another mountain for Ian. And the thing that Joe kind of has to watch out for here is Ian, if he gets a few more mountains, can just start lightning bolting him with that Valakut. And Joe will probably be a little bit loath to use the Tectonic Edge, because that'll choke him on mana as well as Ian. But I suppose if desperation happens, he will have to use that Tectonic Edge at some point. Yeah, we're going to see Restoration Angel. No, he's going to Cryptic Command and bounce one of Ian's lands. One thing that is quite interesting here is that Ian's playing the Rug version of Scapeshift, and he only has 1 green source out, so I suppose that was what Joe was trying to do there, keep him off it. But Ian's going to Snapcaster Mage and target, I believe, the Cryptic Command in his graveyard.
I mean, it's what you should be doing. You're trying to get value out of the cards here.
Yeah.
Because he knows Joe's not able to kill him.
Yeah.
You know, Ian doesn't mind tapping out. There's no worry that Joe's going to be able to do something devastating on the turn after.
No, it's not like the blue-white deck plays Karn or anything like that. It can just untap and resolve it. I think the worst that could happen is...
I don't know why Joe's spending some time thinking. It's like when you're tapped out, you just resolve the spell and move on. You don't think about your next turn when you're tapped out and there are no answers to what your opponents are doing.
He could have had Pact of Negation, you never know.
This is... for me, it's one of the problems with people who play control decks is that they think about their turns when really they should just be getting on with moving the game state forward.
Yeah, I mean, there was very little reason to think there. It was like...
Well, you've got no reason to think. You're tapped out, you've got no plays. It's like, let the spell resolve and move on. This is, for me, it's one of the reasons why some people are quite bad at control decks. Because you've got to play at a really good pace to actually start winning games like this 2-1, where you're against other sort of slow decks. You know, you can't afford to be spending your time thinking, should I say, when there is nothing to think about.
Do you think that just comes with practice, though? If you play the decks more and more, you become smoother with them and just automatically know what the decisions are at that point?
Well, you're allowed to think and make decisions, there's no problems there, but it's just about thinking and making decisions when you legally, you know, are allowed to think.
Yeah. Rather than taking 30 seconds when you can't possibly have a play.
Yeah. It's like deciding what to do when you have no cards in hand.
Yeah, Ian suspending a search for tomorrow. That used to really get my... but that was usually when Dredge was in the environment and the odd people were playing Moldavine Cloak. And used to have... I was playing against a couple of people and they would like have no creatures on the board, no cards in hand, and yet they'd spend 30 seconds deciding whether to dredge their Moldavine Cloak that can't enchant anything or do anything. You know, so... It's not a big decision to make, guys. Here's another click from Joe. Let's see if Ian wants to respond to this one as well.
Well, you'd think Ian will have drawn something at this point that he might want to protect here.
I mean, the other thing is Ian's also resolved 2 cryptic commands already in this game, which means he's just drawing deeper and deeper into his deck.
And here is another cryptic command.
Yeah.
I think Ian will win that counter war, so Joe doesn't try to fight it.
And the other thing that we're seeing here, we can see that Joe has mana leaks in his hand, and because Ian's just been laying out lands calmly and not doing anything, those mana leaks are just getting worse and worse as this game goes on, and it's kind of reinforcing the fact that Ian's very much the control deck in this environment, because Joe's really just running out of time with his deck now. See a Geist of Saint Traft in Joe's hand, but even with the Snapcaster Mage on Ian's side there, just gumming up the board.
It's also funny picking up on the little things like what Joe's doing now with rearranging his land. You can almost sort of guess the spells in his hand by the fact he sort of splits a pile of 4 and 3 apart.
Well, he's sticking 2 lands with his Tectonic Edges just so that he can always have those to use. So you can see he's thinking in his mind, so I have 3 mana I can definitely use without having any problem using my Tectonic Edges. And Joe's major route to victory here is usually going to be Geist of Saint Traft, but the fact that Ian even has a blocker for it now, and the last thing Joe wants to do here is use something like a Path to Exile on the Snapcaster Mage, because he's just going to put Ian even further ahead on mana, and one thing that a control deck hates trying to fight is when it's being out-mannered. I think he just drew a Path to Exile there. I don't think that's going to help him. And as you can see, there's just looking at Joe's hand, it just seems to be some sort of inefficient value creatures at the moment which aren't going to really get him anywhere, and a load of conditional counter spells which again are going to be very difficult for him to try and force anything through. Ian's resolving his search for tomorrow here for another mountain, and I think we
he
might
went for
be
a
seeing...
forest there.
Yes, he did go for a forest, I do apologise. There is a point where you do have to stop going for red producing land, because if you do, your scape shift won't have enough mountains to go and fetch.
Well, Ian's only has 2 Valakuts.
It looks like Ian's going to go for it now. That's 4 mana, and there's scape shift.
At this point, the best thing Joe can do is actually just play out his mana leak and try and get Ian to tap more land.
Actually, saying here, this is one thing that does irritate me. That scape shift hasn't resolved yet. Why is it in Ian's graveyard?
There is mana leak number 1.
Yep. And Ian will just simply pay for that. Mana leak number 2. Oh, Joe, you couldn't have done better with your mana leak pictures here.
One dodgy white-bordered one and a dodgy black-bordered one to go with it.
Get yourself 4 stronghold ones, man. Got your F&M Wall of Omens there. Get some stronghold mana leaks. Here's the 3rd mana leak, and Ian is going to spell paste that, and Joe's lack of mana is going to come back and haunt him here. And yep, it all resolves, so Scapeshift is going to resolve, so assuming Ian has...
Well, Ian will know how many red sources are still in his deck.
Yep.
Because of the red sources already in play, so it's one of the things actually as a Scapeshift play you do is you go, well, I've got 12, 30 mountains, so I can sacrifice these 8 off, keep these 2 in play.
He can also get his 2nd Valakut and just trigger off a million times and deal Joe an absolute bucket load of damage here, so I don't see how it's possible Ian doesn't win from this point. He's got rid of 8 lands there. Yep, 2nd Valakut into play, so all these are going to trigger and deal 6 damage, so that's 24 damage right there. 30, 36, 42, 42 damage, is that good?
Joe's taking his time to count and finally admits he can't win, so it's on to game 2.